This lesson is a review of using proportions and rates to solve problems. So just a reminder, we did look at this before the break, but I thought it was worth looking at again and reviewing. So just a reminder that a proportion is basically the setting of two ratios equal to each other. So we'll work through an example so you can see what that looks like. So in this example, we've got the ratio of flour to sugar for a recipe is 3 to 2. If you have 8 cups of flour, how much sugar do you need? We're going to start by writing the 3 to 2 as a ratio. So just a reminder, we could write ratios in a couple of different ways. We could write it this way. So that's a fairly common way to write a ratio. More useful for us, though, is going to be to write it as a fraction. So in this case, I'm going to write that fraction as 3 to 2. The 3 in this case corresponds to the flour. Again, whatever word comes first here is what is first here. Whatever comes second here is second over here. So the 3 corresponds to the sugar. The 3 corresponds to the flour. The 2 corresponds to the sugar. And we're going to set this up as a proportion. So the proportion is basically just setting two ratios equal to each other. So here was our first ratio. Our second ratio is this right here. 8 cups of flour to how many cups of sugar. So again, we're going to write that as a fraction. And now we're just trying to figure out the ratio of fractions. Trying to figure out what the value is here that's missing. So in order to do that, what we want to do is we want to figure out what do we have to multiply 3 by 8, because these two fractions have to be equivalent. This symbol in here, let me just change my pen color. This symbol in here is an equal sign. That means that these two fractions are equivalent. If they're equivalent, then whatever we multiply the numerator by, we also have to multiply the denominator by. So we have to find that number, and that can be a little tricky sometimes. So if you're not sure and it's not jumping out at you, then you can actually work backwards and say, hey, what does 8 divided by 3 give us? So if we type 8 divided by 3 into the calculator, we get approximately 2.67. I'm going to round it at 2 decimal places. What that means is that we need to multiply 3 by 2.67 in order to get 8. Well, if we multiplied the numerator by 2.67, what do we have to do to the denominator? Well, we need to multiply it by 2.67 as well. So if we take 2 and multiply it by 2.67, I'll just write it out down here. We get 5.34. So that means that if we are going to use 8 cups of flour, we need a little bit over 5 cups of sugar, pardon me. And we should write a little statement here. Therefore, we need 5.34 cups of sugar, pardon me. So that's how we can use a proportion to solve for a missing value. Now, as we talked about earlier in the semester, proportions can be useful. Obviously, here's an example in baking. They can be useful if we're mixing gas and oil. So the ratio of gas to oil is often 50 to 1. If you've got a certain amount of gas or a certain amount of oil and you need to figure out how much of the other one you need, that's a good example right there. Let's move on now and look at some rates. So again, we looked at an example sort of like this before the break, but it's probably a good refresher. So in this example, I can type 312 words in 4 minutes. The question here is how many words can I type in 17 minutes? I'm going to solve this two ways. I'm going to solve it using a proportion first, and then we'll solve it using the unit rate. So proportion, we'll do that here. So when we set up the proportion, we can do the same thing. We're looking at 312 words. So I'm going to put the words on top and the minutes on the bottom in the denominator. And we want to know how many words can you type in 17 minutes. Well, is 17 minutes a number of words or is it a number of minutes? Because it's a number of minutes, we need to be careful. It's going to go in the denominator. So we need to make sure that the minutes are always on the bottom in the denominator and the words are always on the top in the numerator. So now we have a proportion that looks a whole lot like the one we just solved. Again, we need to figure out what multiplied by 4 is going to give us 17. This one's not an obvious one either, so what we want to do then is we want to go to our calculators, and again, I'm just going to scribble off on the side here what we're doing. We're going to do the inverse operation. 17 divided by 4. We'll plug that into the calculator, and we get an answer of 4.25. That means that we have to multiply the denominator by 4.25, and then we have to multiply the numerator by 4.25. So we'll do 312. Again, I'll just write that out so that you can see what I'm doing. 312 times 4.25. Plug that into the calculator, and we get 1,326. So that's using a proportion. The other way that we can do this is using a unit rate. So when we find a unit rate, we know how many words we can type in 4 minutes. We want to find out how many words we can type in 1 minute. So find the unit rate first. And to find the unit rate, we take that 312. Sorry, that's a 2. Let's try that again. 312 words divided by 4 minutes. And when we plug that into the calculator, we get 78 words per minute. Once we've done that step, we've figured out how many words per minute, and we know for sure that we want to go for 17 minutes. So in order to figure out the total number of words we type, 78 multiplied by 17, and we'll get 1,326 words per minute. So therefore, I can type 1,326 words per minute. So that's a quick review of how to use ratios and proportions. Rates, ratios, and proportions to solve problems.